Hello, I'm Trey and welcome to another of my colouring tutorials. I'm going to be doing some flower tutorials using this design because there's 3 different flowers. And for the first tutorial I'm going to be working on this flower, which I believe is Anenome, and it's an unusual one because it's white, but it's making that depth using other colours despite the fact that most of the flower is white. So I'm going to be working on castle art pencils, and I will tell you which colours I'll be using, but I won't be telling you which codes I'll be using, and that's because I'm expecting anybody that watches these tutorials to be using lots of different pencils. So I'll just be telling you the shades of colour rather than the code of the colour. Now I'm going to be attempting this flower, and it's mostly white, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll be using castle art pencils. You'll use any other pencil you want. There's no specification that you have to use what I'm using. Now I'm going to do the petals first, and I'm going to be using a very light grey and a very light yellow. So you just choose the lightest grey and the lightest yellow in your pencil set that you're using. I'm going to use the yellow first because there's not a lot of yellow. I'm going to be putting a little bit of yellow on near the ends of all the petals. So where these little dips are, the points, I'm going to be putting yellow in those areas. It will be difficult to see on camera because this is a very pale yellow, but what I'm trying to create is a subtle effect because most of the flower, especially the petals, are white. That's the pale yellow, and now I'm going to try and put a little bit of shading in using a pale grey, and actually this grey isn't as pale as I would like, but it's the palest one in this set. And what I'm going to be doing, sorry if I'm croaky folks, been a little bit croaky of late. What I'm going to try and do is add a little bit of shading to give a little bit of depth to these petals, rather than just leave them as they are, because even though they are white, a little bit of shading is needed to give the effect of a petal. So I'm going to be going round a little bit where these inner leaves or stems are of the flower. I'm not quite sure what they call this middle bit. So it's just very light. And as I mentioned, this is slightly darker grey than I would have thought to use. So I'm going to be using it very lightly. So I've gone around these stems of the petals, middle petals of the flower, with a bit of grey, just to give a little bit of depth. And I'll be doing the same on all the petals, the white petals. also I'm going to do a little bit almost like strokes for bigger areas. Just extend that lightly. And now I'm going to put a little bit of grey just on the very ends of the tips of the petals over the yellow, just a little end bit. Now that's just one layer of those colours, and obviously I'm going to be putting down a few more layers just to darken it in. But with this one, with it being a very delicate looking flower, I won't be putting as many layers down as I would normally. I'm going to see if I can get away with less layers and see how it develops as I go along. The grey is going to be the one I'll have to watch out for, because it will get quite dark the more layers I put down. So I'm going to be using very light pressure, and this is you know, an effect with white flowers, that when I try and do something like this, I always use light pressure so that I can layer it up gradually and not go too dark. So you just adjusting as you go along. You know, how do you feel it's looking? Is it getting too dark? Do you feel like you need to ease off with the layering, or is it not dark enough? So with white, it still needs some colour, but it's doing it as gentle and as subtle as possible. So I will do one or two more layers of camera and then come back to this. Now I decided to be very subtle with the petals, because like I said, they are mostly white, and what I did was I just did strokes at times with the grey and just darkened in where it is closest to the other sections, and so it's more of a gradient effect coming away from the middle of the flower. And with the yellow I darkened in the ends of the petals, but then again gradient lighter towards a little bit away from the edges. So that's how I've done that, and I am going to leave those petals now as they are. Now I'm going to work on the middle, and I'm going to be using a medium green, a very pale green, and the pale yellow I was using earlier. I'm going to put the pale yellow down first, and I'm going to be doing the ends of these sections of the flower, almost like the middle petals, in yellow. I'm just going to be doing the very ends, maybe a quarter way down each of those middle petals in yellow. Now I'm going to be using the light green, and I'm going to be slightly overlapping where the yellow is and going right down to the middle of those petals where they butt up to the middle of the old flower. So I'm covering the rest of the leaf, petals, wherever they are, in the lightest green I'm using, and just slightly overlapping the very pale yellow I put down first. And this is a middle section where everything curls over, and do all of that in the light green. Because that would be darker, because everything else is folding over it. And throughout that I've always used light pressure as well, because I'll be building up this section, but it'll still be delicate like the white petals. Now with my darkest green, which is actually a medium green, I'm going to be colouring in where I feel the darkest will be, and that is right up at the ends that connect to the middle of these petals. And again, you'll be overlapping the pale green you just put down. So right in to the bits that are connected to the middle. And of course, all this middle bit that's all overshadowed, because the other petals are overlapping it, folded over, all of that in the darkest green I'm using. If you wonder why I keep changing my positioning with my pencil, is to try and keep a point for a bit longer. It saves me sharpening them quite as much. And when you're using soft pencils, it tends to eat into them if you have to sharpen them so much. So I always tend to turn my pencil quite a bit. So that's the first layer of each of those colours. Now the pale yellow, at the ends, the pale green over the rest of it, and then overlapped at the very edges that butt up to the middle of the flower with a medium green. And it needs some more layers, but I'm actually liking the effect already. It's quite subtle, and I'm trying to keep it as subtle as possible. Now I probably will adjust the greens, the darkest green I'm using, which is a medium green. I will extend that a little bit, I think, towards the yellow, but I'll do that off camera and come back to this. I put 2 more layers down of the pale yellow and the medium green I was using, and then I did a very light blend with a blender pencil, not too hard because I'm trying to keep that subtle effect. I'm just going to darken in the very edges of these petals that are butt up to the middle, and in the middle where it's darker and it's the petals are folded over, I leaned on quite hard there and made it darker with my medium green. So I'm just darkening in a little bit at the edge of all of those petals. Right, and that is that flower finished. Because it was mostly white, there wasn't actually that much colouring to do on the larger petals, just a subtle pieces of grey and a little bit of yellow on the end, so that actually wasn't a lot of colouring. The middle bit was a little bit more, but again it was mostly just 3 colours, and in the end I ended up using just my medium green. I extended that and the pale yellow, and still managed to keep it quite subtle. So I hope anybody who's watched this has found this useful. I always find doing white and adding shading to white elements and objects in colouring quite difficult. So I do hope there's some tips here you've found useful. So I'll say bye for now, and I'll come back in the near future with another colouring tutorial.